Am I moving too fast? Am I making too last? Am I waiting in line? Am I wasting my time? Making myself so busy? Am I taking too much? Am I talking too much? Am I fighting to earn? Am I lighting to burn? Relearn and decolonize me. Buma bodauring ya, bupa bohoring ya. Buma bodauring ya, bupa bohoring ya. Nana gajau mai khala barani turina. Bari nilai shodain dada orani turina. Buma bodauring ya, bupa bohoring ya. Buma bodauring ya, bupa bohoring ya. Nana gajau mai khala barani turina. Bari nilai shodain dada orani turina. I am walking with earth. I'm talking with birds. I'm breathing and listening, sensing and feeling the changes of my metropolis. I give you my love. I give you my word. I will give what I receive. I feel what you need. You're turning into Ecopolis. Buma bodauring ya, bupa bohoring ya. Buma bodauring ya, bupa bohoring ya. Nana gajau mai khala barani turina. Bari nilai shodain dada orani turina. Buma bodauring ya, bupa bohoring ya. Buma bodauring ya, bupa bohoring ya. Nana gajau mai khala barani turina. Bari nilai shodain dada orani turina. Buma bodauring ya, bupa bohoring ya. Buma bodauring ya, bupa bohoring ya. Nana gajau mai khala barani turina. Bari nilai shodain dada orani turina. Buma bodauring ya, bupa bohoring ya. Buma bodauring ya, bupa bohoring ya. Nana gajau mai khala barani turina. Bari nilai shodain dada orani turina. Ecopolis, Ecopolis, Ecopolis.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to everyone in the audience of this live stream, depending on where you are on the planet at this very moment. A very warm welcome to this webinar on this Earth Day of 2021. The song that we have just heard was composed and recorded by Daniel Langthasa with the title Ecopolis. And it was recorded in Dimasa and English language and is part of the work that we will be sharing with you today in this online book launch and discussion of alternative worldviews, sharing life, the ecopolitics of reciprocity. My name is Marion Müller. I am one of the co-curators of the work that we will be discussing today, and I am working with the Heinrich Böll Stiftung's regional office here in New Delhi in India. Heinrich Böll Stiftung is an international think tank and policy network that is part of the worldwide green movement, and with our main office in Germany and 33 offices worldwide, We are here in India since 2002, supporting local partners, mainly from civil society, along our main tenets of ecology, democracy, and gender justice. The overall process out of which the book we will be discussing today has grown like the branch of a tree, investigates into new methodologies and new forms of knowledges and practices. It does so within the overall space of ecology and biodiversity, and based on the histories and traditional local knowledge systems and worldviews of the northeastern region of India. Since early 2019, a group of individuals from various multidisciplinary backgrounds, such as academicians, activists, artists, and journalists, just to name a few, has set out to curate and to regenerate an alternative philosophy and pedagogy of engaging with ecology and with biodiversity. The book, I'm just holding it up here, that actually really is rather an assemblage of stories, of poetry, of song, of artwork, and of academic writing. It symbolizes one branch of this process, as I had already said, circling around one main essay. It brings together 12 individual contributions and inquiries into an alternative ecology of knowledges and ecological practices. All the contributions are based on a recognition of the coexistence of different ways of knowing, of practicing, and of being, with a common understanding of the importance of indigenous knowledge systems and practices. All the contributions to this assemblage highlight the wealth of indigenous epistemologies and cosmologies, and they encourage us, the readers, to unlearn, to de-theorize, and to reassemble ourselves in our present thinking and methodologies. So this assemblage or this book likewise should be understood as a process in itself, as a production in a flux, and as an invitation to a dialogue about our common ecopolitical future, excuse me. I'm very happy to welcome here with me 4 of the authors of this assemblage. For the next hour, they will be sharing excerpts of their works and contributions, followed by a dialogue between each other. And I would particularly like to welcome Andreas Weber, ecophilosopher, marine biologist, and author of the main essay that carries the title of the overall book. Based in Germany and Italy, Andreas develops a biopoetics as a new understanding of life, as an embodied process of subjectivity and shared meaning. Andreas is teaching ecophilosophy at the University of the Arts in Berlin, and he is adjunct professor at the IIT Guwahati, Assam in India. Very warm welcome also to Shrishtee Bajpai, research activist and member of the environmental action group Kalpavriksh. Shrishti's research is focused on exploring alternatives to mainstream development models and on documenting worldviews of communities and networking. Shrishtee is calling in from Mumbai today. Kaustubh Deka teaches political science at Dibrugarh University in Assam. Kaustubh's work concentrates on ecological politics, on youth politics, on identity assertion and inquiries into understanding the category of Northeast India. Welcome, Kaustubh. And a very special warm welcome, welcome also to Sonal Jain, excuse me, who is calling in from Shillong in Meghalaya. Sonal is working at the intersection of art, ecology, technology, and activism in India and worldwide. And Sonal has shown her work at prominent venues like Solomon Guggenheim Museum, New York, and the Venice Biennale. Very warm welcome, Sonal. And a very special warm welcome also goes out to Minna Salami, who has joined us calling in from London to contextualize the dialogue through an input from herself, from outside, and yet as part of this assemblage. Minna is a Nigerian, Finnish, and Swedish writer and founder of the multiple award-winning blog Miss Afropolitan. She connects feminism with critical reflections on contemporary culture from an African-centered perspective. Minna will also be taking over the moderation of the discussion after the inputs. I just would like to say that what you might have already realized, that we unfortunately do not have the possibility to take up direct comments, answers, questions, or a dialogue option in this live stream. But I would like to really request every one of you in the audience, those of you who are interested, to please share their opinions, impressions, and inputs in writing to us, to the email that will be announced in the chat. And with this, I end my introduction and hand over to Andreas Weber. Andreas, please let us know your thoughts and lead us into your essay, which has inspired all the responses by our contributors to this book and assemblage.
Yeah, thank
Andreas,
you, Marion.
Over to you.
Thanks so much. And I need to extend this gratitude to everyone here, and also to those contributors to this collective work who are not here right now. And I've been waiting for this day to be with you, although separated by physical distance, but still in this non-local form of closeness, to really express my gratitude for being part of this co-creative process, and of being part of the difficult construct of somebody who is, although very critical, but still by his formation, education, firmly grounded in Western thinking, like me, a white male philosopher and writer, to do this sort of mutual exploration and co-creation of an inquiry into something which is opposed to this Western worldview, but which is deeply needed from within this Western and now, I'd say, mainstream global worldview. I'm going to share my screen and show you some steps of this little journey, and some background of my motivation. That's not the right one, but that's also important to know, the schedule. Okay, we already seen this, and sorry. Okay, so that is the book, and so I'm sorry. Here's something is slightly working without my consent, so I hope it's okay now. So I need to say some things first. What have I been doing here? The aim of this the essay in this book, which is the biggest part of the book, was to unfold ecological thinking as thinking and acting in reciprocity with all living subjects. That is the larger project I am working on. And I have become more and more involved in exploring this idea of a society of being in reciprocity among the humans, but particularly with the non-human world, in my work, by going deeper into animistic and indigenous positions. And so for me, this opportunity to write a sort of huge starting question from my Western point of view, and then have your resonance mirrored back to me and put into this common work, which now is culminating in this dialogue, was really a beautiful and also humbling occasion for me to test the position which I have, let's say, worked out in virtual dialogue with other authors, with thoughts, with also feelings, with practices, but still which comes from the Western perspective. And so it is. I think it is just brilliant that I'm not doing this, I'm doing this not alone. I can do this together. So it is somehow held and received in this wider space. And I cannot stress enough how grateful I am that we can do it like this. And I want to say that everything I'm going to say in these few minutes is meant as a sort of probing suggestion without the idea that it needs to be like this. So it's really a sort of question rather than an answer. But I mean, probably good philosophy in any cultural setting is always a question which doesn't look for an answer, but which is looking for other questions. Just to give you a short overview, so that's part of my work, which has crystallized in books, which they're mostly green. So you see, it's I'm working on. Marion already said this a little bit. I'm working on how to understand this world as alive and shared and experienced. And I'm coming from biology. I'm coming from the philosophy of biology, and I am walking towards a much more practical engagement with other beings in this world. The book we are talking. The essay we're talking about right now, Sharing Life, in some respect is a follow-up to another essay, which also has been originally done for Böll Foundation, so another reason to be grateful, and which then has appeared in a different form as this book, Enlivenment, with MIT Press, which is sort of the same argument, but not without this extension to animistic thinking. Why is this necessary? Why do I need to talk about these things? I don't tell you anything new, but I need to stress it nonetheless. You see the exponential growth curve. Everybody is familiar with exponential growth curves in these times, but that is the plastic production curve with the projection into the future, and so we are in a time which has frivolously labeled the Anthropocene, the time of man, which witnesses the breakdown of the Western model, the Western cognitive empire, as the Portuguese sociologist Boaventura de Sousa Santos calls it, and by causing disaster and havoc. And so we actually, we are pushed to find something different and something else. That's the insects going down at a sort of same rate as the plastic goes up, just to show you something which you know, but which we prefer to not look at. That's the climate warming over the years in the last 3 decades. And now, and as most of us are in India right now, this is a strident realization of this minute. We are amidst this ravaging COVID-19 pandemics, which is an ecological disaster. It's not a public health catastrophe by making. It is an ecological disaster, which results from the lack of reciprocity between humans and non-human persons. And this lack of reciprocity has to do with the decision of Western thinking to make objects of everything which is not part of this Western paradigm. And I think, and that's pretty much the motivation of what I've been doing. And I quote Greta Thunberg here, in her outspoken way, this is all wrong. This is wrong. We see it is wrong because we are living through the disasters. We have started to live in a disastrous world for everyone. Before it was disastrous only for some, and it was disastrous for non-humans, but now it is disastrous for everyone. And it points to the wrongness of the paradigm. And there's also some wrongness about this.
Very quickly,
yes,
with a gentle reminder that you only have
Yeah, very good. Good. Thanks. You said this. And so the wrongness is in the idea that the world is truly only made of objects and not of subjects in communion, which we are, but which we have reserved for ourselves, and which the West has, for the most time, reserved for only Western selves. So we need to find our way back to understanding the world as a communion of subjects, as said Thomas Berry, the American theologist and philosopher. And we also need to understand it as trying to get back to reciprocity, because reciprocity is what is needed if you share the world with subjects and if you don't consume it as objects. Okay, so to conclude, that is apart from the book. As you see, I have, fortunately, so we can discuss. I don't have much time, so it's very, very, very pointillistic what I'm doing here. But I want to boil it down to one core takeaway, at least for me, which is open to discussion with everybody, every one of you. And I want to just to quickly characterize the core beliefs of the Western paradigm, which are we are each other's enemy, which is that competition is a metaphysic given, which is that reality is basically a dead thing, dead assemblage. So we can understand it only by counting and measuring. And in this bleak world, we need to avoid our own individual death at any price, and best done by consuming goods and building gilded walls around us. And in what I have condensed as the idea of indigenous or animistic thinking, these things totally turn around. We are required to work together. We desire reciprocity. Everything has life and inwardness. We can understand reality through participation in its aliveness. And maybe the most important ethos in this is we need to keep the world fecund. Okay, so that was my little starter. Thank you, Minna, for watching the watch. Now I'm taking over this duty to rein in runaways from the time, and we go to Shrishtee as the next presenter.
Yeah, thanks, Andreas, and thanks to the organizers for organizing this dialogue. I'm reminded of the time while I was writing this reflection piece and reading Andreas' essay, and quite fascinated by reading it. So in the reflection piece that I contribute in this book, I try to situate the reflection at a process which I'm most acquainted with in India. It's a process by an indigenous community in central India, where they've been resisting against a mining project for 2 decades. And along with that resistance, they have been also practicing, experimenting and doing various on-ground alternative transformative processes. And while they're doing that, there is emergence of a very different worldview, a worldview that is at very fundamental ways challenging the status quo, the dominant systems that we find ourselves in. And I want to share a quote, a thought, possibly paraphrasing it, of what an indigenous elder there told us when we asked him, why are you protesting against this mining project? Why don't you take some money? They're offering you jobs. Why just we don't go ahead with that? Why this resistance? And he said that, well, we are resisting for life. And what is important is that companies and government can throw us from our lands. They can throw us out of our homes. But why is nobody actually questioning about where will this forest go? Where will the animals living in this forest go? And where will the spirits living in the forest go? It is their home, and that will be destroyed. So it's not just about us making decisions about the land here, but it is about so many other beings. tangible, intangible. And so that in itself was quite revealing of how life and a sense of connection was so much more beyond the dominant imagination, and something that we find ourselves more acquainted with. And this was a very cosmological, spiritual, a sense of interdependence, and as Andreas said, a reciprocal relationship with the rest of nature, with beings from another world, or the same world, who share this world in a very different forms. And some of the important elements which emerge in their whole process of this resistance and transformations is the idea that humans, or the community living there, is just is not really the owner of that land or owner of that region, but rather are custodians. And so it's a very different sense of relationship, and it's also the sense of collective that emerges, which is so much more beyond humans. It's also more than humans, and so collective, and the sense of solidarity is shared with that larger collective. And hence this idea of also a very different sort of a governance. Now, the modern dominant governance that we have constructed around us is so devoid of nature or imagination of actually other beings part of the decision making, whereas a lot of indigenous communities, nature dependent communities, are articulating governance in a very different way, which includes more than humans also part of it. And uh, and I think what is more fundamentally I mean, fundamental to the whole movement, not just in this region, but with many communities in India. And my friends are here who will also share about what's happening in the Northeast, and also in many other parts of the world. What they are fundamentally questioning is the key concepts of modernity. And modernity, what it has taught us or is trying to force on us, is that there is only one way of being in this world, while these many examples across the planet are telling that there are so many ways of being, there's so many ways of living, and they're doing it in their everyday life, in their everyday practices, with that strong assertion of multiple ways of living and being. And 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 towards the end of the piece, what I try to think about is, or also argue for, which I think is where maybe Andreas and I might disagree, is where can we actually find this in the current discourse, in the current law, in the current legislation, certain space for. And I feel that the whole rights of nature movement emerging across the world is possibly opening that very small opportunity for us to actually begin thinking about this, finding space for these cosmologies, these pluriversal worldviews in the dominant systems, and actually recognizing that there are also different ways of relating with nature, and questioning the extractive, property-oriented, colonial way of relating with the nature. And so hence these various examples across the world of granting rights to the rest of nature, rooted in the many indigenous ways of looking, or other local communities who have been articulating that connection with the rest of nature. So emerging from that. So these are some of the threads that I explore in the reflection piece, by giving examples from also different parts of the world of visions of connections with nature and the rest of nature, and what is really a good life or well-being, and arguing towards a movement like that of rights of nature that can possibly take us towards a different transformative world that we're looking for. So, and some of these threads we can definitely explore in the discussion. And I guess I pass it on to Sonal now. Sorry, Kaustubh, I guess.
Thanks, Shrishtee, and thank you to the Henry Paul Foundation for this platform. And I must thank Andreas in the beginning for the wonderful essay. We all really loved connecting with the essay. We, especially coming from the location that I'm in, Northeast India in Dibrugarh, Upper Assam, I actually saw a lot of possibilities. I mean, in many ways, I connected with the essay. I also saw a lot of tragic moments in which I could sense that, I mean, there are opportunities that in our region we have historically missed out on. And there is a lot of mechanisms of history there. And I would try to basically share a couple of maybe photos or slides with you. And is Sarah, you can show the slides because I'm trying the file. And Sarah there? Okay, I think it's fine. I think I'll get it. Is it coming now on the screen? Okay,
Looks
fine.
good.
All right, okay, fine. So basically, yeah. So this, I'll come back to the photo in a bit. I'm trying to basically argue that, I mean, when we talk about an indigenous knowledge or the very being of an indigene, I was trying to basically contextualize this whole discourse in a region that is going through a very rapid, or you can say even radical kind of transformation. And then in that sense, basically, what do we hold on to? So, I mean, of course, because it's a very short span of time and we don't have time for a detailed discussion, but quickly trying to sum up this whole, three kind of triadic three vantage point through which we often approach the issue of Northeast India for the larger audience. Basically, it is a very security-centric approach because of geopolitics, because of rich ecology, diversity of resources, and also cultural diversity within India, which is supposed to be a storehouse of a lot of ethnic minorities. So these three kind of approaches, often when you talk of Northeast, India's Northeast, which is a combination of 8 states, we see a lot of importance of these three kind of approaches. Well, so this, while reading Andreas' essay and also today's discussion so far, what basically kept coming to my mind is that, this whole idea of biopoetics, or the idea of a cosmology of interdependence, all that actually gets very crucially tested when we talk about the very becoming of a region like Northeast India, and we see so many kind of crucial reflection from the region. And this is actually one of the oldest tea garden from where I'm based in Dibrugarh. It is not far from here. This is one of the oldest garden of whole of the region, and Assam tea, as most of you might be knowing, is now a global brand. This is one of the oldest garden, and the train line that you see is again the first railway line of the whole of Northeast India. The garden is called Bisakupi, with the name of the Singpho tribe that is supposed to, quote unquote, have discovered commercial tea crafting. So this picture of the present day is very reflective of this whole extractive regime that we have of gardens and different resources, minerals, oil, coal. So this is basically a resource belt, and that reflects on the kind of opening up in the region. And many people call it now a militarized landscape, carbon landscape. The one on the right that you see is actually a rainforest. It is an elephant habitat also. And recently there has been a controversy, even now that is basically a matter of jurisdiction now, that there is a proposal to open up the forest for coal excavation. And on the left, you can see these are coal being kept there. It's one of the largest coal belt of India, in fact, headquarter of Northeastern coal fields. So, this kind of situation of this hinterland, which is full of resources, at the same time being heavily militarized because of the geopolitics, does leave some kind of a reflection or some kind of effect on how people basically see themselves vis-a-vis their resources. How do they engage with the resources? That remains very important. Therefore, when we talk about, in my opinion, when we talk about issues of indigenous identity, we also have to talk about this whole kind of, opening up of spaces, the whole transformation of spaces through infrastructure, so unrelentless construction. One on the left is, in fact, one of the oldest kind of sketch of my hometown, Dibrugarh, in 1848. I don't know it's clear or not, but it says the Brahmaputra from Dibrugarh, Assam. And on the right is 1848, and the right is the present Dibrugarh town. So you can see it's like an unrelentless flow of capital, which is changing places. And as sociologist Sanjay Barbara talks about calamities, insurgency, and capital, these three things. and I have an unrelentless kind of a march of capital that is changing places, that is changing people's self-identity, that is changing people's way of interacting with their larger world around themselves. Then moving on, as we already talked about the issue of Anthropocene, I think it is very important also to not talk only about when, but also talk about the when and where of the Anthropocene, not only the how of the Anthropocene, but when and where. And again, we see on the right is another picture from Assam. That is, this new wealth that is with people, this luxury imported cars like Audi, Mercedes, and others you see is very common on the streets now, which was not the case before. And in fact, this is a very interesting contrast that I find in the cycle rickshaw. You see this symbol of a past prosperity, elephant kind of pulling timber, and then luxury cars passing by. So this old world collapsing and a new world emerging, but there is still some kind of a binding thread of perhaps destruction, you can say, or extraction, or some kind of tragedy. On the left is a photo from the newly constructed one of the highways in Nagaland in Northeast, where there are a lot of ancient trees have been cut down and the road expansion is going on. So this snippet gives us
Kaustubh, I'm sorry to tell you, you have
Sure.
3 minutes left.
All right, sure, I'll keep it in mind. Yeah. And so finally, basically, I will just come to the issue of another example of Northeast to show how there is a concept of context, that there are the concept of context vis-a-vis timelessness. This again, two things. One, on the right, you see this rock formation in Mechuka in Arunachal, in Tibet border, in fact, very next to Tibet border. And this tribe is called Memba tribe, which is partly in Tibet, partly in Arunachal Pradesh in India. This formation is sacred for them. They think it's a representation of their landscape, of their homeland. But now, because Indian army is there, they take a lot of pride by getting it aerially kind of, the aerial confirmation of that. So even they look at their own identity through that. And on the left, there is a sacred stream, which they say it's Guru Rinpoche meditated there. But there is another alternate version of the geopolitical state. That is, they say Guru Nanak came there from Tibet, the Sikh holy guru. And there was some tension regarding that. There was a construction of Gurudwara was being proposed. So there's geopolitics interfering with people's identity. And this is a picture that I referred to before. This, in the back, you can see this JCBs and all this modern kind of construction ongoing. And in the front, you have these people displaying their proud identity. So what is the connection between the two? So my final question is that basically whether our sense of indigeneity has to negotiate with these other issues of extraction. Many times the indigenous people are asserting their right over resources, but that necessarily does not mean that they are not part of the economy. So they are also extracting, they are part of the carbon citizenship, they're asserting some kind of fossil fuel identity. So it's very complex. And my final slide, basically, despite it all, there are indigenous practices which talks about reciprocity, that talks about people giving back to society. In Naga, this is a slide from Nagaland that we see something called Fist of Merit. So there are this type of very contrasting and complex equation that is coming up in a region like Northeast India right now. That one's idea of indigenous knowledge or indigenous identity is situated within a complex regime of extraction, in which partly they are placed as collaborators also, partly they are resisting, and in between this whole flux, this new idea of, I think, kind of a cosmology of interdependence and complexity is coming up. And I know I rushed through a lot of things because it was a very wide kind of an area, but I hope I could make some sense, and I expect some discussions and questions on that. Thank you so much. Thank you, Andreas. I think now it goes to Sonal.
Sonal, yes. Thank you, Kaustubh. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. I'd like to first, of course, thank everyone for organizing it, and also all the participants for being here in such difficult times, especially in India. I think, the COVID cases are rising and everyone's under a lot of stress. And basically what I'm going to be talking about is my contribution to the book. And even this, I think, has to do with it came at a very interesting time because COVID was, completely ongoing. So I found myself between these strange worlds where, you're getting all this information about COVID and a virus and all of this. And at the same time, I was doing research on water beings, which, the indigenous people believe to be a reality. So somewhere, I've always grappled with the idea of the, like the notion of reality in fiction, in film, and it just became, the puris, which are the water beings, seemed more real than the virus at some point. So yeah, just starting with that, I'll read out one part of, the story. And yeah, it's called The Entropic Forest, and I'm reading out part 2, which is The Dreaming Waters. As the sun is setting, Basil, 66-year-old man, wearing torn and tattered clothes, is sitting by a small stream below a bridge. He seems oblivious to the world and is talking to himself as he looks towards the stream. Inside an empty house, desolate and lonely, Vanda, a woman aged 53, sits by the window panel, peeling areca nuts. Carl, her young son, is sitting on the stairs, laboring over trying to repair a water pump. The emptiness and melancholia of the house scream out loud. It is a large house full of quirky and strange antiquated furniture, a tiger skin, a big armchair, a gramophone. But what stands out is an ornately framed picture of young General Gaddafi hanging centrally in the sitting room. There is an eclectic mix of objects with an absurdist air to it. 3 cats lounge in different places. We move slowly through the musty sitting room into the dark hallway. Iba, Vanda's daughter, stands looking out from the topmost floor of a white tower. She has dark, intense eyes and is wearing a white, flowing dress. The tower is a mausoleum with many floors and holds the urns for the entire family. We move in a circular pan around the mausoleum, looking at Iba as she sings a sad requiem. Many large trees surround the tower. The sound of wind whispering through the trees accompanies her song. Vanda looks out from the sitting room window. White clouds like cotton candy float across the sky. She has a resigned look on her face and says to no one in particular, "It's going to rain." We hear a strange gushing sound coming from the underground water outside. As Carl hears this, he gets up to check what it might be. He opens a heavy metal door of the water tank. Laying on its belly, he looks inside. The sound of water gushing becomes louder. It is dark inside the underground water tank. Iba is on the terrace. The sky gets overcast as rain clouds gather. She picks up the clothes from the clothesline, struggling against the gushing winds. Next morning, the sun is out and it is a clear, bright day. Basil, Vanda's husband, opens the tall gates of the house and walks in. His back is bent, shoulders stooped, and clothes tattered. He walks with his weight towards the left, dragging his right foot forward. He is soaked to his skin, and water is dripping down his body. He walks into the sitting room. Vanda is sitting by the window looking outside. As she hears him enter, she turns around and looks at him. He goes straight towards a large worn-out armchair and collapses into it. The water seeps into the armchair and drips down onto the ground, making a small puddle around it. Vanda just stares impassively at him as he shuts his eyes. She turns around and looks out of the window again. Her face hardens slightly. She looks up at the sky, where the storm clouds gather very swiftly. The rain comes down heavily. We track out of the sitting room into the darkness. Next morning, the rains can be heard crashing down on the tin roof. The sound is deafening. The room is dark and gloomy. Iba is sitting on a rocking chair, holding one of the cats a bit too tightly. She is nervous and out of sorts. The other 2 cats prance around her chair. Carl sits repairing an old radio, and we hear the sound of different frequencies come and go. Vanda sits by the window looking out. Basil is on the chair in the same position. His body has sunken a bit further into it. His eyes are closed and he seems unconscious or dead. We track out of the room into darkness. Next morning, the room is even darker than the previous day. We still hear the heavy rains accompanied by gushing winds and storm. Carl sits by an antique desk leaning on it. He is playing with the switch of the old table lamp, turning it on and off. The light from the lamp illuminates his face. He is in a gloomy mood. Basil is immobile in the chair with his eyes shut, arms sprawled out. Iba lies sleeping on the sofa with her legs up on the armrest. The cats lie around her. Iba, in a white flowing gown, is in a subtropical broad-leaved forest. She moves deftly, hiding behind trees, looking at someone she is chasing. The movements are blurred and hazy at times. The scene is dreamlike. In the sitting room, Iba is now lying on a chair, fast asleep. We move in a slow tracking motion out of the room into darkness. Next morning, we can hear the rain outside, but now it is a gentle drizzle. Basil's face and hands are now gray. His body is bloated like it's been underwater for a long time. Carl sits on the carpet, leaning on a wooden sofa, staring blankly into space. Wanda is staring at Carl. Iba sits on the arm of a sofa, playing nervously with her hair. It stops raining, and as the sun comes out, the room is suddenly flooded with sunlight. Wanda, Carl, and Iba look decayed with time. Basil's body is completely gray. The cats move tersely around his body. It becomes very quiet.
Sonal, so I'm sorry, you have 2 minutes.
Sure. Slowly, the chirping of birds emerges, and then a faint gurgling sound from outside. The gurgling grows louder and louder. Iba looks up at Carl. He looks back at her and gets up with urgency. They rush out towards the sound. Wanda follows them. The gurgling gets even louder. They rush up the stairs to the terrace with the cats in tow. They look down and see the trapdoor of the underground water tank is open, and water is gushing out from the tank with great force. The entire compound is getting flooded. As they look down, to their amazement, out come hundreds of fish from the water tank. At first, they swim about chaotically, and then they make proper formations and swim around the house. They circle it several times. The cats meow frantically and go crazy prancing on the terrace walls. From under the water, we look at Wanda, Iba, Carl, and the three cats up on the terrace looking down in disbelief. We sink deeper and deeper into the water and into the darkness. So that was one part of the story. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonal. Okay, so now it's to Minna for concluding remarks.
Thank you, Andreas. I hope that you can all hear me. My sound quality wasn't great before. Awesome. Thank you so much to all of you. So I just want to really very quickly add to the introduction that Marion gave in the beginning, that I'm Minna, that's my name, and I'm an author and a researcher, and I've recently written a book titled Sensuous Knowledge, a Black Feminist Approach for Everyone. And I've spent a lot of time in recently exploring rivers metaphysically rather than physically, and looking at how conversations with nature can help to kind of elucidate on feminist social criticism. So I just wanted to share that so you understand a bit more about why I've been invited to share space with you in this wonderful conversation. So I'd like to start by thanking and congratulating each of the contributors to this groundbreaking and really exciting book. So first, of course, to Andreas, your essay, Sharing Life, the Ecopolitics of Reciprocity. I mean, there's just so many things to say about this text, and there's so much that resonates with our times and with other urgent movements that people are involved with around the world. The book is so original in its conversation with other people. I've not come across a book that does that, and I think that is really brave, and it shows your commitment to practicing animism, as you write about in the text, rather than just theorizing about it. It's a really practical text, as well as a beautiful one and a theoretical one. And I think what you spoke about earlier in terms of, you said you were looking for questions, that kind of sums it up really beautifully, because normally people would say we're looking for answers, but you're reversing it and saying we're looking for questions. And that really is something that I felt as a reader. But at the same time, you do provide these really pragmatic types of graphs, like the one you shared with the five core beliefs of Western thought and of indigenous thought, which leaves the reader with a practical sense of what to do and where to go. Shrishtee, your essay, A Living Hill, Reflections on Animistic Worldview, Stories, Resistance, and Hope, was such a vivifying read, and really, I really appreciated the, for want of a better word, the kind of international, cosmopolitan approach of like sharing stories of indigenous knowing and of animism from across the world. And you spoke about one of the stories which you shared also now about an indigenous elder asking, where will the spirits go? Is such a profound, in terms of, in the light of looking for questions, I think that is a wonderful question to find, in a sense, where will the spirits go, and what do we mean by spirits? And it, it encourages us to think about individual versus collective ownership, as well as the rights of nature, which is something I'd love to discuss with you later during the discussion, because you mentioned that there might be a slight tension between your thinking and Andreas's thinking on the rights of nature. So hopefully that's something we can unpack later. Kaustubh, I hope I'm pronouncing your name okay. Framing the indigene in a frontier in flux. I am profoundly thankful for this essay. I thought it was really stimulating. I resonated with a lot of the thinking in it, and what you alluded to in your presentation just now. It's wonderful to have you here, because you do bring a critical perspective while appreciating the contribution of animism in a modern context. But it is so important to sort of emphasize the lived experience of indigenous people, and also to ask, as you do in your contribution, who is the indigene, and what is the kind of trope of indigeneity? So yes, I think your contribution, you're encouraging us and reminding us to query into how we speak, into language, in a sense, and a kind of warning that the indigene is not this abstract and timeless figure. And as you showed in the presentation, they're very much like us, people who are extracting and contesting and negotiating identity in many ways. And Sonal, lastly, I really love your story, and the entropic forest is such a powerful way of conveying the many worlds that we as citizens of the world in the 21st century find ourselves in. And it's the almost surreal reality of a world in which, which is hyper modern, and where mega corporations are informing politics, and where there's surveillance capitalism on the one hand, and then on the other hand, this world of myth and imagination and indigenous knowing and communing with the natural world. And I found it really powerful to draw from myth, and to share this story of a river nymph, Puri, I think the name, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that okay. But yes, it really is a wonderful way of bringing creativity and urgency together. So congratulations to all of you, and also, of course, to Heinrich Boll and to everybody who's here, who's helped to organize this event. It's amazing that we can, despite being in this digital space, perhaps I should also express appreciation to forces of nature that allow us to be here, especially on Earth Day, and we're able to breathe and to be present and share this moment together. So I'm sure that for all of the participants, you will agree that this has been a really stimulating conversation so far, and there's lots more to come. We're going to spend an hour or so just discussing and sharing and unpacking some of the themes that have come up. But I feel that this first hour has already communicated very strongly what, for me, lies at the core of the book, which is that there are other ways of knowing, of being, of seeing the world. And we have already started to, we've already gleaned that from each of your presentations. And of course, the book also makes a strong argument for animist values, and positions those as a tool to counter the climate emergency. And I think speakers will agree that this conversation, and I hope that participants will bear in mind how this conversation, both what we've already listened to and what we're going to be talking, all the things we talk about, how they can help to contextualize and shed light, not only again in the mind and in how we think and how we learn, but also on actual events that are happening, in kind of the geopolitical sense. So, with things like the coronavirus and land grabbing and forest fires and all of these issues. I think it's, this framing of reciprocity, of animism, of indigenous knowledge is really useful as a way of understanding the world. So we've covered a lot of things already, and of course it shouldn't stop here. So after this event, I know we all want participants and any viewers who watch this afterwards to practice what Andrea says, that we should do more than just familiarize ourselves with concepts. So I want to open the conversation with we have all these discussions about ecology and ecofeminism and the Anthropocene and Catholicene and Capitalocene, and I'm sure I'm forgetting many other forms of way of analyzing our planetary situation today. But what can people do next? Where do we go from here? Because this is about more than language, as important as language is. So my question is that if you could encourage people, and if you yourselves could choose one element of animism that everyone, and especially people in the West, can incorporate into their lives, what would that be? Maybe we can start with you, Andreas.
Yeah, thank you so much, Minna, for this beautiful resonance to that work, and brilliant question. It makes me think a little bit, and maybe the answer which immediately comes to myself is feels less expected, but on the other hand more easily to universalize. I would say it is paying attention to our own feelings and needs, being true as living beings, and from that then will inevitably happen an openness to the trueness of other living beings. And at the same time, as you all know, probably from your own living practice, it's a very, very difficult thing to do. And it's a very courageous thing to do. At least, let's say, it's to try to do, because it's not something you can easily do. And in saying this, I am alluding to one thing I have elaborated on in the book, which is that as living agents, we humans are as much ecological persons as every other ecological person is one. And I'm speaking of every person, not only human persons. That has become clear by now, that all the other than human persons with whom we share the world. And what they are doing is being true. They are true to their needs, and that is their power, and that is their vulnerability. And it is something we yearn for doing, as you all know. It's important to being aligned with our needs as a living being, but it's also something which has been colonized by our imperial thought system, and I'd say that everybody can start there immediatly, and you don't even need a pot plant to do this. So it's maybe you expected me to say, okay, go outside and meet a non-human person, and I mean that's somehow, it is somehow included, but it still can be something where you project your needs to somebody, and it's important by starting to really trying to open up yourself. Okay, that was my first shot at the at an answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody like to volunteer to go next, or should I? I mean,
I'm really curious now. Yes.
Let's go with Shrishtee.
Thanks, Minna. It's a difficult question to answer while you're situated not particularly in the West, but because one is also dealing with a lot of Western imposition, it's also not too difficult to imagine what it is, and I think for personally for me, if one has to think about how me being in a learning spaces in a journey up till really being exposed to listening to these stories of people and communities, until then my connection with the rest of nature was completely devoid. My terminology was also not about rest of nature. There was this inherent separation from the rest of nature. One did not even imagine oneself as part of it. So I think the recognition could also begin from really realizing that we are also part of it. Like what really makes us human is so much more beyond than just our dominant understanding of what it is to be a human. And also basically grounding ourselves wherever we are into our connections with the food we eat, the plants that grow around us, the birds that we find around us. We need not be in a forest to know our connections with the world. We can be in a city and yet figure out where is our water coming from, what are the species in the cities, what are the plants that are there in the cities. But our connections are so devoid of our immediate surroundings that it is always like we need to go to a national park to reconnect with nature. But how do we reconnect with nature wherever we are? So rethinking our own connections with food, with living, which is what one has learned from people. It is in their everyday lives that the connections are restored or established and nurtured. And I guess that's what I find myself exploring. Of course, it's a everyday journey, but that's my exploration, and I can share it on that personal level.
So in a sense, you and Andreas are suggesting the same thing of being, finding nature in oneself, you could say. And in addition, Shrishtee, you're saying that, I mean, am I right to say that you're suggesting that we become more curious, more attentive, and present to the way that we also are part of the natural world? Yeah, because I think, you know, people could argue that, yeah, like I have water coming out of my tap every day, or I have plants, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're fostering any kind of relationship with the non-human natural world. So there's an intentionality to this practice, is what you're saying. Sonal, would you add anything to that?
Sure, I think, you know, it is such an important question, and I completely resonate with both Andreas and Shrishtee on their point of views, but I also feel that, you know, of course, Western education is something that we've, you know, imbibed through, you know, not just schooling, but also media and, you know, the works. But apart from that, I think what is interesting for me in, you know, in my position is the fact that it's almost like, and I think most Indians and Asians, at least, they live in this kind of world which is on the edge, you know. So you, through your upbringing, you have so much of, you know, this indigenous world that is just passed down through different means. And now, the more, you know, like Shrishtee mentioned food, I'm always curious about where the breaks came, like where the breakage in this continuity of these cultures, these traditions happened. So, you know, even in terms of, I'm very interested in, you know, indigenous healing systems and you know, allopathic Western medicine. So, and there is so much wealth in our cultures, you know, regarding these things. And I keep asking my mother about, you know, like, so you tell me that your father would make these medicines. He would, you know, take these 5 herbs and, you know, dig a hole in the ground and put them in this earthen pot. What happened? You know, how come you didn't learn these things? And, you know, those kind of things. And also, I think, yeah, so it is a question of modernity and, you know, the colonial, you know, colonialism and all of that, of course. But at the same time, I think there is, to me, you know, I was doing, like, I really found that interesting that you talked about rivers. So I've been obsessed with, you know, the Brahmaputra and other rivers for, you know, ages. And during one of the projects, the only question, you know, as we were traveling up the Brahmaputra, I would ask the farmers, what do you buy from the markets? And they would say oil and salt. That's all. Most of them would just, you know, be foraging from the forests and growing their own food. And that was really, really illuminating for me, because here are living cultures which are sustainable. And I think, you know, but the only thing that I saw in them is that they lack the pride. Even now, whenever I travel to, you know, really so-called non-developed places, I look at the systems that are, you know, there. They already have sustainability within the systems, but what they lack is pride in those systems. They are looking for, you know, the modern amenities and comforts and all of those things without realizing the wealth that they already have. So I think that is something that I would really, you know, I keep questioning myself, and I would like to put that question out to everybody. How do you know, regain that pride? And I think, of course, it has to do with, again, the idea of decolonization in many ways. So, yeah.
Kaustubh, what do you think about this notion of pride? And maybe I glean also from Sonal's response.
Yes, Minna, yes. Yeah, I have the advantage of speaking. I have the advantage of speaking at the last. So I heard all of the other my friends, and yeah, I take bits and pieces from all of what they had to say. And I do agree that, you know, I mean, one of the main takeaway for all of us is basically to, in a way, relook at our positions within the natural system, to find our locations where do we belong to. And also, I do agree that there is also this renewed kind of, you know, emphasis or understanding about, you know, trying to, you know, get back our traditional knowledges, our traditional wisdom that we had. And having said so, I would also like to also take this situation in the context of this, societies coming to terms, this traditional societies coming to terms with this modern kind of diseases or the conditions of modernity. I mean, here again, there are so many things coming to my mind listening to all the other friends. The Shrishti's story about spirit, just now what Sonal talked about river. In fact, this spirit reminds me of a very interesting kind of anecdote recently that I came across, and this pertains to the present, this pandemic that is going on. In Arunachal, there are these tribes, especially tribes like Adi tribe and Galo tribe, and they have traditional healers, shamans. They are traditional shamans and healers. The shamans were doing actually a ritual to ward off COVID in the beginning of the pandemic. And it was very heartbreaking for all the people because they had to do it with mask and within a quarantine kind of sanitized kind of space. So it was a very interesting kind of, the traditional world basically trying to, in a way, negotiate with this new type of development that is happening. And that is one. And also, this complexities. Now, again, that's why, I mean, being perhaps from political science, I cannot just come out of the frame of geopolitics. It just keeps coming back. And, in places like Northeast India, Arunachal, these are very geopolitical hotspots. Like, we have bordered a lot of other international borders around. So even the mythologies of the tribe, the myths of the tribe, the issue of self-identity, these are always kind of geopolitically decided. But there are a lot of, undercurrents, like, how a society will self-identify, which will be the flow of the mythology, how you kind of revive your traditional knowledge, how do we kind of, give it a name. So this politics of naming, that is very crucial. So now I guess this present kind of difficult times is giving a lot of, room for people to reflect on all these things. And you are very right, Sonal is very right, this ideas of foraging, like how you're going back to our traditional food and all that. But at the same time, the presence of this very strong presence of this modern structure of nation state, of market, these are in a way very predominant in many senses. And we just cannot, the idea is to rescue our sense of indigeneity. How kind of a reframe perhaps, and despite or besides knowing all these kind of parameters. So again, my whole kind of, question comes back to that. Thanks.
I really want us to unpack all that as the conversation moves on, and we should like to problematize the case for animism in a sense, because I think that it's really important to sort of show, not to say that that's what you're doing by any means. I think as you just said, it's kind of both and rather than either or. But before we get into that, I think it might be useful that we all actually, or that all of you define what animism is, because people listening might benefit from just having a kind of a definition of animism. Because just to preface that, in many ways, animism in the context that we're speaking of it could be seen as synonymous with having respect for all living things, or empathy for all living things. So maybe you can bear that in mind as you answer the question, like, what is there a difference between this kind of indigenous knowing and animism and simply having respect for living things or empathy for living things? Maybe we can start with you, Kaustubh, because you're still in the screen.
No, if I get you right, you were talking about the differences between the indigenous ways of knowing and animism, like what it means to me. Is that what?
Is animism the same thing as having respect for living things? And if it isn't, then how would you define animism?
I mean, yeah, to a large extent, of course, that will be for me, that will be the core of it. I mean, but at the same time, also, I think animism for me, at least, will also mean to have a sense of oneself within the ecosystem. That will also bring in the knowledge of history, one's particular location within the social world. So, I mean, it has to be a kind of an interdependence that is woven into the very nature of one's being. And the respect or the interdependence has to flow from that sense of identity and history. So therefore, I guess, I mean, the whole idea of historicizing one's identity, that becomes very important for me. Because as we have seen in many instances here, especially, Many of the movements that begins with the claims of indigenous identity or indigeneity, we have seen oftentimes, completely diverting to a different direction, self-defeating itself, perhaps not for the lack of the nuanced kind of engagement with what's historical kind of a baggage that is there. So I guess the sense of history, the sense of awareness, the sense of one's clarity about location in one's social space, all that is also an equally important part of animism. So beyond and besides the core of it, which is, of course, as you're rightly saying, the sense of mutual respect and interdependence within, within the ecosystem of all species. So, I mean, that's how I will see it. I mean, I'd like to hear from others. Yeah.
Sonal, I'm really curious what your answer is, seeing that you're working so much with river bodies and spirits and things like that.
Yeah, I think, it's such an important question, and something that has occupied my mind for a long time. I just feel like, like Shrishtee said rightly, there probably was a point even in my life where, I subscribed to the anthropocentric worldview, and because I've had a Western education and all of that. And I think that slowly broke down. And I think those were really like powerful moments. In fact, I remember looking at, just staring at the Brahmaputra one evening because I was living next to it. And, it just does something to you, because when you look at this massive river for a long time, you just realize that it's not just a water body, it's so much more than that. And when you start feeling the energies, then I think, those changes start coming. And for me, I think, in terms of what it really means, I think continuity of this interior life that we have, like I think the skin per se is, like the moment we say that, okay, this is me, and we kind of reverse that and say that, no, this is all me, and look at everything else as part of yourself in a way, is I think such an important thing. Like, animal spirits, dreams, I think all of these ghosts, and like I said, on one side we have this kind of Western worldview, but at the same time we have grown up with stories of ghosts and spirits and alternate kind of understandings of being. Because the other thing that comes to my mind is, I'm forgetting the exact term that is used, but in Jainism there is a particular way of looking at the world which is multi-perspective. So it's there's this famous story of these blind men, and an elephant is put in front of them, and all of them grab a particular part of the elephant, and they say, oh, the elephant is like a rope. The one who grabs the tail and the one who grabs the legs say that, oh, the elephant is like a log, and so on. So this thing I think is also a really important philosophical kind of position for me, because there's only so much I can know. And just this breaking down of this construct of reality is something that is really powerful for me in those terms. And like I said, working with water spirits here has been just so powerful, because meeting with somebody who's been affected by them, possessed by them, she lived her life, many years of her life under possession of these water spirits, and actually sitting just talking to her is, you can't deny these realities. So
that must be really powerful. In my own exploration of rivers, and I've been using rivers, or having conversations with rivers, rather, in the intent of wanting to develop new ways of looking at power. And so what you're sharing right now makes me really curious to find out more. And basically you're kind of saying that the difference perhaps between just having respect for all living beings and animism is some sense of a dissolving of the own self, of the own body, and everything merging in some way. Would you have any thoughts on that, Shrishtee, that are in a similar vein or different angle, perhaps?
Yeah, lots of thoughts. Um, yeah, I think agreeing to what Kaustubh and Sonal just said, and because Sonal mentioned about rivers and you as well, it has always been, and I would like to pose that as a question and also reflect on this question of animism. And it has perplexed many who have been working on rivers, especially here in India, with the Ganges being so sacred, revered among so many communities, yet running polluted, one world's most polluted rivers. And there's this flux that you find yourselves in. People still revere the river. There's whole politics happening around the river. Our PM winning elections on the basis of the river, but yet the river is polluted. And why is that? Why? Where is this confusion? Where's this clash? And one finds this whole clash of the sacred and secular discourses, because our bureaucracy, our management systems, our governance is secular. It's colonized, and um, that's where the contrast is. That's where a self is actually confused of what it really means to revere a river, hold it sacred, um, have that connection that it can absolve all your sins, have that sense of interdependence, yet also pollute, throw shit, garbage in that river. And how that happens, I have no answer to it, but one sees that reality as part of everyday lives, and it's an unresolved, contested reality of life. And it's not an answer that I have. Of course, it's a paradox. It's a confusion of human existence in general, of having that sense of dependence on the nature, yet exploiting it at an unimaginable levels, and the crisis that we find ourselves in. So I'm not answering it, but rather posing it as another possibly thread to discuss.
Yeah, there's so many threads in that, and it feels to me like there's this, it's a count, the opposite ends are in some sense between modernity and not animism maybe, but the reverence that we have toward natural elements like rivers. So as you spoke of earlier during your presentation, like how modernity plays a role in all of this, and because we have reverence for modernity, and then we also have reverence for the sacred, and there's a clash happening there, perhaps especially for people who've been colonized and who live in this kind of border space where we have to negotiate so much of our existence. So last but not least, and Andreas, what is animism?
Yeah, I've waited for that.
You can distill it into.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, animism is the idea that the world is peopled by persons and not by objects. Persons like us, and everything comes from that. So when you say is animism about respect? Yes, because the world is shared with other persons, and persons merit and demand respect. They merit respect, but they also demand respect. If you don't respect them, they become angry, and that's something we with this insight we can work on, having a look at the state of our world currently. So it is important to know that what animism is actually hasn't anything to do with the concept of animism, which comes from European colonial ideas. So that is a pejorative thinking of primitive people worshipping deities in trees or something like this, and it's totally marked by the subject-object dualism of European thinking, and it doesn't understand what is really happening in animism. But as it still prevails, the Western mindset, if you start to talk about animism, then you've got these stares. Okay, so are you serious? But there's been fortunately, there's been a lot of research, serious research, anthropological research been done in the last decade or 2 decades maybe, and more Western scientists just accept or happily surrender to the idea that it's not just an attitude, but it's a possible way of being which could really pragmatically in a performative way help our aliveness, anybody's aliveness, to get back, I'd say, back into sharing the world with other persons. And as I said, I think if you get there, then everything follows. And if you share the world with other persons, you need to start a process of reciprocity to keep this world going, being creative, being fertile, being nourishing. So you also need to nourish the world in order to be nourished by it. And then all these things we see as the fatalities of the Western way on the whole globe, they're not possible in this worldview. So you need to, if you want to raise chicken, you need to ask them if they want to live in a chicken factory, and they won't respond in Hindi or English, but you can see it. You see that they don't want to, and it's easy. I mean, it's easy, and that's where my first answer to the first question comes in. So it's not only conceptual, but it is also about being animated. So it is also our way of inhabiting our lived body, which is in necessary need of other lived bodies and which feeds other lived bodies. So it is a fundamental existential reciprocity already at play, which creates our experience of being alive as subjects among other living subjects, and which we have access to. And that's what I was alluding to at the first question, that we should reclaim access to our primary animatedness, which has taken away from us, and not only from indigenous people in that literal sense, but from everybody. And because we consider ourselves abstract, efficient seeking, whatever, economic agents, and it's not true. So we have a wealth of animated knowledge within our embodied experience, which is always shared with other beings. And then a last point, which is very important, which Sonal is the expert today for. The world is peopled by persons, but some of these persons are not visible. Some persons are spirits. And so if we sympathize or totally surrender to the animistic take, then we also need to acknowledge that there is a part of the world which is alive, but which is not visible in the Western sense, that you go and measure and take data and publish them or whatever. So there is a, who said that of you? There is a, yeah, Sonal said that, there's only so much we can know. And I think that is extremely important, and it's extremely beautiful, and it stops that hubris that if we only know, then we fix it, which is also the hubris of the say the ecological progressives. You know, we always come up with solutions, and no, it's still the old non-animated paradigm that the world is a thing and we are the intelligent ones, and we find it, and there are different opinions, but the right opinion needs to be applied, and then we do it. And I think it's wrong. And I think this shocking, traumatic, painful situation of the global pandemics is just the appearance of this, that we truly don't know. We truly are held by something which is about life, but which is not totally graspable for us intellectually. But we can partake by sharing this, but this is totally different from grasping it intellectually. Okay, that was a long answer. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. In the book, or in your essay, you speak quite a lot about something you call self-decolonization, and you pit that against the kind of what you call the Western cognitive empire. And from what you just said, it seems to me like self-decolonization is perhaps something that Westerners need to do, like most urgently need to do, but it also would be something that everyone who lives in a kind of modern society, which is all of us to an extent, has to grapple with this kind of self-decolonization. And part of that is really moving away from the thinking that everything, sorry, that everything can be measured.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yes.
Kaustubh had raised a hand. I've noted that down. Kaustubh, before.
No, I guess, yeah, no. Whatever Minna is saying, you can finish then. I think she was, are you, yeah.
Yeah, no, I just have so many thoughts spinning in my mind. I was thinking of this thing about codifying and creating laws and rules, and while Earth jurisprudence kind of speaks to incorporating animistic values and ethics into modern society and modern thought, does it also risk becoming a way of codifying? But yeah, it was just it might be something to consider.
Yeah. So that's the topic of the rights of non-human beings, right?
Yeah. Yes. So like the Wanganui River in Bolivia was granted the rights of a person. I think in India you have a few rivers.
Yes.
Also. Yeah, but it's I just find that field to be really interesting, because once you enter that, you're obviously implying personhood, which is, which has to do with legal frameworks and codified rules as much as it has to do with something poetic and animistic.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really curious to hear Shrishtee on that. And before, I hope you allow me to just spontaneously on what you say. As you already sense, there is a sort of tension, and so all of you sense that I might not be a proponent of this approach for some reason. And this has to do because in the meantime, after writing this essay, I've done some more research on this, and I'm absolutely favorable of granting autonomy to what is not human. That should be clear. So I'm totally against grabbing away which wants to live. Only that the Western idea of legal rights goes back to the Roman idea of legal rights, and that they are about property. A right is a sort of property. It's a sort of property of a certain group of people, and that were only the Roman nobility, who had they had land, and they had slaves, and they also had rights. So there is a profound undercurrent in Western thinking, which binds rights to properties. And property, I think, that's just something we need to get rid of. The idea that I can and need to possess objects, because there are no objects. There are persons, and I can't possess persons. I need to ask them if they want to spend time with me, or if they would like to feed me so I can feed others or something. You see, I've become profoundly animistic. So that's my caveat.
Can I just ask, does this also apply to objects like res extensa, to matter, to tables and mugs and lamps?
Yeah, that's or iPhones. Yeah. It would be a source of a lengthy philosophical discussion. And I'd say I'd say rather yes than no. But you can't see. We should see. We should also stop seeing objects as clearly delineated in space. We should see them as a parts of processes and also as social agents, and also as made of other objects which are truly no objects. So that the table might be probably is made of trees in some sort, whatever the chemical formula is. So it becomes blurred. I'd go with that. And I think, I mean, yes, it's for me. It has been a sort of journey. So when I started as a philosopher of biology, I was very much biocentric, but it doesn't really make sense, because then again you draw a boundary, and only if you understand the cosmos as one process of aliveness, disseminating in individual processes, yearnings of aliveness, needing others to come about, then you have it all. Although it might appear in this separated, delineated shape. So I'd say we always need to ask. Okay, so now I've really talked enough, and I'd like to invite the others to give a perspective.
Yeah, Minna, if I can come in.
Yes, please come in.
Yeah, I mean, the other time actually I was trying to quickly make a point while listening to Shrishtee talking about sacredness of especially the Ganges, the river Ganga, and how the whole kind of a dilemma or the kind of a dichotomy of people still polluting. And basically, I mean, I live by actually Brahmaputra River. Dibrugarh is right on the bank of Brahmaputra River, and there are many river systems here. So it is literally like a riverine kind of landscape, and rivers are a part of life. In fact, we call Brahmaputra here as a river of life. And in fact, there are almost up to 12 to 15 names just to describe Brahmaputra as per different communities. So, I mean, what I was trying to reflect on is basically there are so many ways of connecting to a river. And in India right now also, there is this whole kind of, the quote unquote politicization of the river. There is this, all rivers are made to be like the Ganga or the Ganges river. And there are river festivals, so-called. So, I mean, what I was trying to just think aloud is that, perhaps also we have to kind of look into the lived realities of the places, which is essentially perhaps animistic at some point, and how these rivers and the river systems are already a part of everybody's life, without in fact calling it sacred, or without even giving it certain kind of definition. Because when we give it a definition, we fall into the trap of the power structures. Then we kind of set some kind of parameters that this is how you worship a river. And whereas many a times people must be, in fact, if you remember the last slide just now I shared, I did not have much time to dwell on that or describe them or talk about them. And there were kind of two slides. In one, there was a picture of young children swimming by a boat. And that was from Majuli. This is a river island. In fact, India's one of the early districts, island district of India. In Majuli, there was a picture of young children who crosses the river every day to go to their schools. They swim across the river. And places like Majuli are full of communities who are literally, they grew up with the river. They are every year devastated by floods. And there's a long debate, in fact, how floods, in fact, are a colonial kind of creation. How, in fact, these are interventions that have disrupted people's, kind of harmonious relation with river systems. So these are disruptions being created over the years. And now even we cannot relate to our rivers in the way that it used to be. So, I mean, this, in fact, this kind of, lived reality of everyday life with the river, that is something, the everydayness of river and this type of, landscapes. That is what I think we need to also kind of value, which we need to, talk about more, and which we need to appreciate more. And, where it is very much a part of life of different people. And even our kind of different kind of indigenous technologies, indigenous knowledge, they are all derived from this interdependence. They are, so there is an essential kind of a natural element of animism. which is so ingrained into it that very many a times we don't even realize that it is there. And moments like this, when we reflect on it, so we look back, then we realize that how it has always been there. And there's an increasing kind of a dissonance there. There's increasing inability. And one more last thing that I will kind of pass it on is that this whole idea of spirit, that again, is very fascinating, that keeps coming back. And in fact, I was not very clear while I was talking about the geopolitical tension and the spirits. In fact, I guess there is also at this point this question about who does the spirits belong to? Is there a nationalization of the spirits? Because, there are competing claims within nation states even to claim that now. There is myths of the communities, there is a spirit world, which we invoke through different rites and rituals. And now there are attempts that different, larger states or other power structures, they are trying to, even influence the interpretation of those rituals and rites. And through that, it's in a way, it's like that you are trying to, in fact, own, or, you are trying to appropriate the spirits also. So it's about maybe again, rights is a complex or a difficult word, but it's about the rights of the spirits also. And perhaps, moments like this, we see that how the limitation of such projects, the helplessness of humans as a species, or the limitation of our national projects, and, we are suddenly made aware of this vulnerability, moments like this pandemic and all that. But I think, there is always this tension between these two worlds, and we are forever trying to, in a way, appropriate them, give it a name. We are bringing them in the frame of geopolitical competition within larger nations. And in that, the smaller communities are forever on the losing side. We are losing our mythologies, we are losing even our autonomy to, in a way, lay claim to our spirit world also. So these are again bringing back, these difficult questions from the quote unquote modern world that keeps interfering with our sense of our, animistic world. So how to kind of find some kind of, bridge to connect the two, that is my kind of, way. I mean, we are talking about this today, so I think we need to talk more on this. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much. I think we really need to bring out the dissonance and the tensions that you're speaking about, because that's how we can strengthen whatever value animism has for the modern world. And certainly for me, I mean, your contribution resonated so much with me, because I do feel perhaps that there's a risk in when we speak of these things, that we create this kind of idea of a pure indigene who's separated from the lived experience and from geopolitics and modern realities. And I wonder if, I mean, I'd like all of you to, we don't have a lot of time left, but I do want us to make sure that we talk about this dissonance a little bit. I just wonder how we can problematize, and maybe there is something about finding value in modernity. I mean, the very fact that we are here as individuals who have the choice to be here speaks to some kind of value of modern values, value of modern value. Anyway, I hope you get my point. And can Shrishtee, can you speak a little bit about this?
Yeah, sure. It's a difficult, while you were speaking, I was thinking about it. It's a very difficult question. But in many ways also a lived reality for a lot of us, including the communities that we work with or we are associated with. And for one, like, I've always wondered about how just by who I am, by being of a product of modernity, when I always visit the villages, I take modernity with me. I take the development, so-called quote unquote development, with me, and create that sense of aspiration while I'm there. But that's me. But whatever is me and constructed as me is, of course, a big contestation. But I also see that how communities have been innovating and interacting with the whole this interesting contestation of modernity and traditional. And I want to give you one example, share one example of this happening in the same community that I work with. They have been protesting against these mining projects and organizing themselves, collectivizing, and also questioning a lot of lot of things that are happening internally. So while they're also struggling against the whole nation state and corporations taking away their lands, they're also questioning what's happening internally, what traditions have been doing internal injustices, and one being how they have been very dismissive of women in decision-making spaces, how they have been not including them in any spaces, despite realizing that women are the most connected with the forest. They are the ones who nurture that connection with the forest. And that's where the whole modern idea or this modern connection in many ways of linking of what it is to participate, what it is to be included, and what it is to be really taking decisions, not just being a participant in a corner, but taking decisions, has emerged with that interaction between modern ideas of including women, women having rights, women having rights to property, to land. And it's a very interesting process that is emerging on the ground, and with those connections in mind. And that's how lots of innovations are also happening. Farmers, people, in fact, this community also using technology in a way that can take out their products, reach to the larger market. So there's very interesting, especially by young people, because there's an aspiration, but there's also this sense that I want to be connected to the land. I want to be connected to my craft, to my tradition. A lot of people are losing that, but there's some young people who have that sense. So there's always this friction, but yet also accommodation that is happening. And I see that very beautifully in the communities where there is no strict positions that people acquire. There's no left and right or ideologies that people stick to. It's about life, and there's innovation, there's acceptance, there's rejection, but that's happening very with a lot of collective sense and responsibility, and a duty to not just to the self but also to the other. And other includes much wider other, which is more than humans and the spirits, etc. So I'm of course learning of how that those discussions are emerging, but that's where I see not always a contestation between the two, but also finding ways to coexist, so to say.
That's very reassuring. And just to think that it can also be about conversation and dialogue rather than just the kind of tensions. Sonal, would you want to add something to that?
Sure. I think, I think I have a few points to make on the overall discussions, but I'll start with the question that you posed just now. And I think, I'll give the example again of the water beings project that I was working on. And it was really interesting because, in my initial research, I just found examples of the water beings being feminine, being women. And as I searched more, and they were always made out to be as some kind of having these subliminal power over men and taking possession of men, and the men being victims. And I was like, this cannot be true. So then when I started digging deeper and I started looking at other narratives, then slowly the other side emerged, that there were women also who were being taken possession of, and it was not just men. And they were not just malevolent, they were benevolent spirits as well, and all of those things. So, and also the fact that the stories were very gendered and sexualized. So in that sense, I think all of it is so much of this, when you live in a patriarchy, it just automatically, even the myths and stories and all of these things become sexualized, and there is the hierarchy that you have to fight. So of course, the merits of modernity in that sense, I would definitely like to bring out. And talking about what Shrishtee was talking about, it's really interesting because the idea of sacredness, I think, is so interesting, because coming from a place like India, there's just so much of it. And now I think the shift happened, of course, when our first Prime Minister Nehru talked about dams as being the new temples of modern India. And I think that is a powerful moment even now, because I was also just traveling up the Ganges, and I went up to the source, and I was shocked to see how so very close to the source there are dams. And it's just heartbreaking to see all of that, of course. But like the moment you give development and modernity sacredness, I think that is the shift that's happened in India. And in terms of sacredness, again, like what Andreas was talking about, I think that's a really important question. And an example that comes to my mind is from northwestern Australia, where I was doing a project, and some of the elders there talked about how we cannot, that's what they said, we cannot fight the white man with the white man's rules, or we become the white man. And I think that really shook me up again, because like how do you fight these wars? And this brings in the question of, again, like the entire question of property and non-human rights. Under which legal system are you granting non-human rights, and to whom? And again, it is an anthropocentric position that you take. So all of those questions. And the other thing that in terms of sacredness, and the same thing, I think is I draw a lot from Buddhism and a little bit from Jainism, where they talk about sentient beings. So in the basic philosophy itself, they talk about even minerals having life, minerals being sentient. And I think that's really powerful for me. And that, of course, is reflected in the new materialist theories now. And it's really interesting how a lot of the Western theories are also kind of coming around it. But I think, there's a lot to be taken from both Jainism and Buddhism in those terms. So thank you.
Great, thanks. Yeah, it's really important to bring in that gender perspective. And, I think that's part of where I have concerns, is that, I do a lot of work with Yoruba philosophy, which is in Nigeria, kind of indigenous knowing. And that certainly has a lot of patriarchal elements to it, which need questioning. Equally, I think, indigenous peoples are arguably also part of shaping modernity, and not only indigenous as in people who live with nature, but all of us who are from colonized parts of the world. We can't just simply speak of Western rules anymore. I think after so many decades, surely we also have influenced them. I'm going to pass over to Andreas, but before you kind of get the chance to give the final response, Kaustubh, you might want to add a few more words on the nexus of modernity and indigeneity.
Okay, so as again, I might bring in the whole idea of disruption, and because listening to Sonal about the issue of sacredness and the raw Australian example, immediately I was thinking of examples of, and also the example of Buddhism. Immediately I was thinking of examples from my own backyard, especially in the hill states of Nagaland and others, where actually every rock in the village would have some connection with their belief system, with some historicization of they were part of some history. There are mythology of how in the past ancient wars, the rocks would take shape of giants and protect the village. So every piece of rock had the identity. So this interconnectedness is there. So having said that, if you ask a young person from the village what is his ambition and the most preferred profession, right now it is likely to be that of a contractor who will break open the rocks and make path and road. That's where the money is. So there is this whole dilemma there. How do we kind of make sense of that? At one hand you have this whole plethora of mythological awareness, this sense of connection at one hand. There again, of course, the role of the body, of the community bodies and all are there. But this modernity, the inroads, the flow of capital, the presence of militarization, this strong geopolitical state, that's influencing people again. If that's the hard realities that people would say, okay, a contractor. And that's where people are moving into. People are buying bulldozers, equipments to break open the path and make new roads. So this nexus is very crucial, and that's where does the final voice stays? Who has the voice? So that's very crucial. And again, I will go back to what Shrishtee in the beginning, I think, mentioned about this type of movements, or this nature kind of course there is a problem. I agree with Andreas again that this kind of this progressive kind of conservationist kind of position, where at the same time you essentialize also that power of this kind of one kind of dimension. But so there are so many complexities, but I think that's important to understand this. Yeah, thank you.
So who has the voice? Andreas, you have, I think this is going to automatically shut us down in 4 minutes. So let's
3 minutes actually.
3 minutes, okay.
3 minutes.
Not a lot of time.
Yeah, so I'll only have one sentence. Thanks for raising the attention to that it can be very problematic to instantiate a romantic concept of the animistic from a European perspective again, and this is why I put so much time into understanding that the animistic or the animated is this reciprocal transformation. So it's always about creating fertile mutualities, which are not, it's not about any form of hedonistic niceness, because mutuality does always mean that you give yourself totally into it. It's actually, and I stop with this, it means to make yourself edible in order for the world to be fecund. And you see, it's not something which is consumable actually. So I'd say that in this light, we need to rethink relationships on any levels. Yes, thanks.
Thank you. Well, being aware that we might get cut off any minute, I want to make sure to thank all of you and to thank everybody who's shared space with us today. I had the words of a Chinese physicist that I came across once in mind. And he said, I'm going to paraphrase, but something along the lines of, we should learn from the past, but not to be confined to it. And we should learn from the West, but not to forget our own knowledges. Zhang Zixun, his name was, and I think that it kind of encapsulates a lot of the messages and the insights that we've shared today, that all of you have also contributed to in the book. And speaking of the book, I hope you'll still, I don't know if somebody can put into the chat where people can get the book, but I very much recommend everyone watching to get a copy. It's a really groundbreaking, very exciting book. I devoured it, even though the topics, are urgent and intense and complex, but it felt like a light read somehow because it's so interesting. So please make sure to get a copy. And yeah, thank you once again, and happy Earth Day to everyone. I hope you have a chance to enjoy the rest of this day with nature in some way.
Thank you so much, everyone, for this wonderful session. We will be continuing the discussion, that is promised from my side. Yeah, I guess we will be kicked out in a few minutes. So I just would really like to thank everyone who has been contributing today. Thanks a lot. We were supposed to also take a photo with the books raised up.
Yes.
Is it the moment now?
Are we able to do that still?
Yes.
I think we are. Oh.
Maybe we should all try to do it on our computers, so at least one of us gets it.
Yes, so now somebody needs to do it.
Done.
Fantastic.
I think it's done. Thank you very much.
So
thanks a lot to everyone. Have a wonderful, have a wonderful day, afternoon, evening, and hope to see you all again very soon.
Yes.
Continuation of this discussion and raising further questions. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank
you all. Thank you all so much.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you so much.